team from KRIA and Treasury and a team from Kipra that are working on this. We are happy about the support from the Danish government, and that is going to work very well. That for us is very, very important. The second thing is that I forgot to mention what is the elephant in the room when you talk about short-term crisis, liquidity crisis, and why the international capital markets is actually quite problematic. It's the Eurobond. Most of you talk about the Eurobond June 2024, but they forget that actually it was contracted in 2014 at 6.8% for 10 years and to be paid as a bullet payment in June 2024. This is $2 billion. Every time the market looks at us, they look at us in terms of you may not manage to pay this heavy coupon. So the strategy by the government is that we are going to buy back small portions of it until we reduce the exposure and reduce the jitters in the market. In that way, then we can have some confidence in the market. So a combination of reforms in our policy, in our tax policy, going to give us some sustainable measures, sustainable revenue measures, and even very, very important for us, but also taking off this elephant in the room is also going to reduce the jitters in the market. It's a combination of that. And finally, of course, everybody talks about institutional reforms. And Keith talks about markets, as I had talked about, and also Serim in terms of the measures that the structural benchmarks we have agreed with the IMF. We do believe we are in a takeoff. And this development unit, the coordination unit, is actually going to help us in terms of monitoring what needs to be done and what needs to be activated at all times. And we'll have a scorecard to make sure that it is done and appropriately done. Thank you very much.
So, Your Excellency, we have come to the end of this session. I think what comes out here is that, yes, we have had challenges in our macroeconomic environment. Shocks have been there. They have been persistent, and they have contributed to an environment of high inflation, high interest rates, a weakening shilling, with more fiscal costs for us. You had the CSAs, we have had to spend another 145 billion to deal with the, debt payments arising out of interest payments and weakening of the exchange rate. We have also taken through the fiscal consolidation measures we are taking through. So in the program we have with the IMF, we are going to be very focused on tighter fiscal policy with a lot of reform measures, and then especially focusing on SOEs. We will be working on that. And I think we have also had the support we are going to get from IMF, the World Bank, and we have also multilateral bilateral partners that are going to be very handy to support us. So I think all is well. Just to inform you that also on the Eurobond, we were ready to go to the market. We have already identified lead managers. We have Citibank and Stanbic Bank, and they are ready to move to the market. Of course, taking into account the support we already have received through the multilaterals. But we will be in the market if the market conditions improve. I therefore want to close this session by inviting Cabinet Secretary Mercy Wanjau to moderate the next session. Okay. Yeah, I think Mercy is coming, and I will now hand over also to the Master of Ceremony for the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
It has to really go low for me. Your Excellency, the Deputy President, Excellency Ambassador of the Netherlands, Co-Chair, CSs, PSs present, Excellencies, the Ambassadors, Heads of Mission, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm just knocking on to midday. This third session comes to elaborate at even greater detail what the policies or the agenda that will be anchoring the development priorities of the fifth administration. For that, we will have two presentations. The first one is Dr. David Ndii, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, who will then be followed up by the Principal Secretary, State Department for Economic Planning, PS James Muhati. From a look at the program, we have 45 minutes, so I trust that each of them will do a 20-minute presentation, after which we will have a round of discussions for about 15 minutes as we close. Karibuni. Dr. Ndii.
Excellency, Bwana Deputy President, Your Highnesses, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I think we change gear a little bit from macroeconomics to political economics. I am going to share my 20 or so minutes with two of my colleagues. So I hope I will do just 5 minutes of a very high-level introduction, and then my colleague, Dr. Sianga, will speak to the operationalization of the plan, and my colleague, Crispin Bouquet, will provide just 5 minutes of a preliminary assessment of where we are, because it's 1 year. We've already done a year, so we cannot really be speaking as if we're starting. We have some preliminary report. We're working on our president's report. It's work in progress, but it's actually already what informed the State of the Nation address in terms of taking stock. Several of you here, Excellencies, I think we were here just before the election when we shared our manifesto ideas, which, if you recall, we were running on a transformation agenda with 3 items. One is around the Constitution. That was the sort of the issues on the table during the election. I remember that we had one side, this side, which was talking about implementing our Constitution and entrenching it, and a side was saying maybe we should sort of change it a little bit. The other one was about transforming our politics from politics which has not always been very constructive, very ethnicized, personalized, often leading to political crisis, to more civic issue-based politics, and thirdly, to the theme of democratizing the economy. Now, the bottom-up economic transformation agenda speaks mostly to the third, but I want you to keep alive the other two, that in a sense, our agenda, our vision of our political agenda is that in Kenya we have been on a journey of political democracy for the last 30 years, and we feel that we have left behind the economy, so we want to align political democracy with economic democracy, which in the macroeconomic conversation we've just been having translates to inclusive growth. The process by which we started this by changing the process by which manifestos are formulated and in which political parties and leaders develop their relationship with the governed. We started by developing our manifesto in a bottom-up process, very participatory. Instead of writing a manifesto and selling it to the people, we went to the people and engaged them in conversations, town halls. We asked them to tell us what they would like us to do. And they told us. So instead of us going to talk to them in selling our ideas on platforms, we sat and they told us what their issues are, particularly around the economy. What could we do to improve their lives? We held over 100 town halls. I don't know whether you can have a graphic there on, which sort of just shows that journey. That culminated in what we call county charters, 48 of them, 47 for each of one of the counties, and what we call County 48, which is our diaspora. And they are very granular with commitments by the president. We end up with the culmination event where the president signed these charters, contract with the people. So one of the challenges that we face is that what we promise the people is on record. And they have a copy. So they have a scorecard by which to judge this government. And we think that's important in terms of institutionalizing political accountability. So that's one of the ways. The next very important thing which informed the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. So what I said, it is not only bottom-up conceptually, it's also a bottom-up process. The second aspect of it was, of course, the context. The context in which you're implementing, which has been discussed here, is very important and very consequential, very material. We have called it in the plan, if you read the manifesto, we've called it a perfect storm, comprising of three things, three elements. I think you can move on to the next slide. One is the global turbulence, which I don't need to belabor. We all know about it, which continues, particularly the inability for frontier markets to access the bond market and therefore refinance our bonds, their financing risk exposure. Compounded by the fact that this global turbulence has caught us when we are very, very exposed in terms of fiscal fragility. We've had over a decade of very, very high budget deficits and market debt that need to be refinanced, including the biggest bond from frontier markets maturing next year. And it's not the only one. If you read the debt, the sort of market debt literature, you will come across the term as a debt wall that frontier markets are facing. So in addition to that, fiscal exposure is in fact the underlying context that we were addressing in our campaign, which is a legacy of trickle-down economics, which I would like to summarize as growth without transformation. It has been spoken to. And that growth without transformation has then led to a crisis of expectations, particularly with the youth population be getting a demographic dividend. But of course, if you don't create the opportunities for that demographic dividend, it can flip and become a political problem. So that is the context in which we have had to craft this plan. So I want to summarize it very, very quickly. If you move to the next slide, it's a house. No, if you go to the next one. Yeah. So, to translate to summarize this plan, at the very top of that house, we have what we call 5 high-level outcomes. Those outcomes are the cost of living. There is a revenue base, expanding the revenue base. It's been spoken to. There's foreign exchange. There is employment, and there is inclusive growth. That is growth which does not leave anybody behind. Now, the method in that sequencing, if you look at it, it speaks from the urgency. If you look at the most urgent thing when we came into office, the cost of living was the biggest crisis. It still is. And of course, the fiscal crisis and the balance of payments crisis come together because of the turbulence. That's why revenue becomes very important and foreign exchange becomes very important, because that's what you need to be able to restore the country's creditworthiness and forestall what has already been described as a liquidity crisis from becoming a solvency crisis. And then the two structural things, employment, which you need also to address quite urgently, and obviously making the economy more inclusive is something of a more structural nature. Now, when we're looking at those imperatives and all the things that we had picked up, we settled on 5 pillars, which I highlighted there. Agriculture being the probably largest pillar. And the reason for that is the following. If you want to get this economy as inclusive as possible, the largest population in Kenya is still in agriculture. It is also the sector that has the highest potential productivity gains that you can get without very significant investment, because the investments are already in place. You have farmers, you have livestock, you have coffee trees, all sorts of assets that some of them can have a very, very rapid supply response. Unlike if you think about manufacturing, you have to build a new factory, raise capital, build a new factory. Do you have a market? Those sort of things will take a bit of time. It also hits very many birds with one stone. It hits your cost of living because of food. It is inclusive because that's where many people at the bottom are. So raising agricultural productivity very quickly is the thing that we saw would, in terms of sequencing, would play a very big role. Micro and small enterprises, again, that's a very inclusive sector. That's where most of people are. Digital is very critical because there are lots of opportunities for the youth there. Housing is critical because we are aware that we don't have the fiscal space to continue with the infrastructure building that we have been doing. So the question you ask is, if you then cut back on infrastructure, which has been supporting aggregate demand, what takes its place? And it happens that you do have a housing crisis, and instead of building roads, which you cannot afford, actually, on budget, you can't anymore, you can cut some of that slack in the construction sector using housing and actually having useful infrastructure. So it's an expenditure switching kind of strategy. And of course, health is also, we picked health because also you have a very rapid response, and health shocks are very critical in terms of the kind of economy that we have and affecting people and enterprise. At the bottom, there's a set of enablers which I want to speak to briefly. There's cooperatives, there's digital, and there is climate action, among others. Now, the reason that those enablers are there, let me speak, and they are there because of their potential for creating inclusive economy. If you think about cooperatives, we know that the economic politics of economy have revolved a long time over the merits of a market economy, of laissez-faire capitalism and state-owned economy. We know the merits and demerits of both. And in our case, we believe that given the structure of the economy, a stakeholder capitalism, if you like, organized around collectives, is the halfway house that we need to create a market economy that is inclusive and that does not leave anyone behind. That's a principle that we believe. Digital, we can already demonstrate that leveraging on digital is something that we see opportunity for being able to deliver and reach many people other than other means that we have used. We've already used a digital platform, for example, to intervene in the financial inclusion space, using the Hustler Fund. We have used digital to intervene in delivering agricultural subsidies in the farms of fertilizer. We have registered over 5 million farmers, and we are using that very effectively. We will be deploying a digital platform to deliver universal health care and a whole lot of other things. And finally, climate action as an enabler that recognizes that given our ecology, there is a climatic dimension of marginalization in Kenya. If you look at the places which are most vulnerable, they are also the places, the northern Kenya, the rangelands, they are also the places that are most exposed to climate change. Therefore, if you want to not reduce, but end that kind of economic vulnerability of a climatic nature, then climate action becomes a very, very important enabler killer or mitigating factor. If you do not take climate action, then whatever else you do, there are large populations that will be left behind on account of being affected by climate shocks. So that's the overall framework. I think it's quite brief. I would now like, that is where we start. I would like now the colleague to just talk briefly about how we have operationalized this within the budget and within the MTP framework, within the county CEDPs, because that is where that converges, particularly with the development partners. Thank you very much.
It required you were in the meeting. You were in the meeting, Mr. Speaker, and the answer of Mr. Speaker, 400 million was required in the discussion of the meeting for purpose of Mr. Speaker expanding the government saying that we are trying to million from KA and the national government.
Your Excellency, the Deputy President, CSS, PSS, Head of Missions, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I have very few minutes to take you through the operationalization of the plan and a few details on the commitments and the interventions that we are currently undertaking. So if we can go to the next slide, we have the mainstreaming of the plan, and we have actually mainstreamed the plan into MTP4 and the CIDP. And this was very important because MTP4 being a policy document that informs budgeting and also the implementation of the different projects, it was important that we get all the priorities into MTP4. So this was done, and it was done around 5 sectors, as you can see: finance and production, infrastructure, social sector, environment and natural resources, and governance and public administration. So the budgeting was done around that part, and we just didn't do it for the national government. It was also done at the county level. We know county governments, they have CIDP 5-year cycle. And when the new government came into place, we actually had meetings with all the 47 county governments. We met the CCs, the directors, and the chief officers of all the priority areas. So they had to tell us their priorities in terms of agriculture and all the areas that were in the plan. And that was well taken care of, and we are optimistic that they will be funded at the county level, the priorities, because as you can see, agriculture is heavily devolved, health is also heavily devolved, trade and MSME is also a county government function, and unless we make sure that proper funding is provided at the county level, then we may not achieve our objective. So that actually happened. Now, in the next slide, those are the sectors, the 5 sectors that we came up with. If you can remember, there was a Nanyuki retreat where all the PSS and the CSS were taken through the plan. And just because we wanted to make sure that they are all delivered and to avoid the risk of duplication and the risk of MDAs working in silos. MDAs were clustered into the 5 sectors, and as you can see, for example, the finance and production sector, we have the National Treasury, we have agriculture and livestock, we have cooperatives and MSMEs, trade, industry, and investment. And the last column, those are the priorities that were in place that we've been working on: the leather value chain, livestock, garments and textile, industrial materials. Those are the value chains that I'll later on show that have been captured in the medium term, that is in the budget for the financial year 2023-24. So I'll not go through all the other sectors, but as you can see, we have the MDAs grouped together. And there was a question earlier on that why can't we have the sectors put together for the fund, for the development partners, and so that it can align with what has been done under the bottom up. And as I said, you know, we want to avoid duplication, and we want to make sure that all the priorities are well catered for. So those are the sectors. So we can go to the next slide. That's the same. We have governance and public administration and the others. And if you see these sectors, all of them are supposed to actually help in delivering what was promised in the plan. For example, like governance. We have devolution in there. In the plan, we promised that we are going to transfer all functions earmarked to county governments within 6 months. That can only happen under the devolution space. And we need all those other MDAs to support in that particular area. Now, in the next slide, we've talked about the value chains. The CS Treasury had talked about it. And these are the short-term value chains for the financial year 23-24, and they are all budgeted for. So we have the leather value chain, livestock value chain, we have apparels and textiles, crops, blue economy, mining, industrial production, and the building materials. So, and in the next slide, you will be able to see that it's actually budgeted for. We've just picked one example, that of the leather value chain. And the way this works, I'll just use that example, but we can always then use garments and apparels and textiles. So the way this works is that, for example, the sector on finance and production, they can all meet all the MDAs in their treasury, cooperatives and MSMEs, cooperatives, trade and trade as well. They can help in delivering on the value chain. For example, leather, for you to have good quality leather, we need the agriculture and the Ministry of Agriculture. We need both MDAs, the MDA of livestock, and we also need crops because they have to provide the feeds. Then once you have good leather, then of course we need cooperatives and MSME to organize this leather. And the plan actually under leather was that we would hope we would mop up 3 million hides and 18 million skins. And we are hoping that this actually would increase the income from that particular sector from the current 17 billion to 120 billion. And it would actually create jobs from 17 million currently to at least 100 million. And this will help us in achieving the high-level outcomes that our chair of council talked about. So if you have these now coming in together, then of course you'll need trade and MSMEs to look for the market out there, not just out and both outside and within the country. And that was the thinking why we had that particular value chain approach as a method of implementation, and so that we can actually help in delivering the promises. Now, in the next slide, I am going to just quickly take you through a few details on the priority value chains. I'll not go through everything because we don't have much time. But under agriculture, the overall agriculture priority approach, or the transformation here, is actually to move from where we engage farmers directly to an approach whereby government sees land and livestock as very important national assets. And our chairman has talked about cooperatives. So here we are saying that the individual farmers will be organized into cooperatives, and that the cooperatives will actually now be used to provide what the farmer needs. Then in terms of extension model, we know extension services are also devolved, given that agriculture is devolved. And these extension models, this is now where we are moving and saying that now the government will engage with cooperatives. They'll provide technical advice, and we'll have data-driven agriculture. Chair has talked about KMEs. Farmers have been registered. And we want to see farming as a profitable enterprise, and that we just don't want to leave farmers alone. Now, the next slide just shows the value chains that have been identified in the agriculture, and there are three main pillars. These pillars are actually the food security pillar, and the plan is actually to transform 2 million poor deficit farmers into food surplus farmers by providing them finance and inputs. Then we have the reducing import pillar and the growing exports pillar. And we can actually see the value chains identified there. In terms of food security, we've seen what's been happening under maize. We've done very well. This week, we've seen 100 dryers have been sent to four counties. And we are going to have a bumper harvest, and it's because of the very many interventions that were identified during the 47 economic forums that Chair talked about. The next slide shows the specific interventions that have been mapped into both crops and livestock. So for the crops, for example, one example that is life that I can pick there, the second intervention, where we are saying we'll need to minimize post-harvest losses. And that's now where the dryers come in. We have some where we have to provide seeds, and we have actually gone ahead and actually identified the intervention for each value chain, as you can see in that particular slide. Now, the next one is just a continuation. The next slide is a continuation. You can see pyrethrum there. We've seen some good work happening in under pyrethrum in Nakuru, Molo area, and we want to again have this crop. It used to actually do a lot a few years ago, and we want to revive it, and that's why we are saying we want to establish new and strengthen existing value chains. So it's just a continuation of the other slide, but what we've just done is to just pick all the value chains and just give the intervention that each needs. Then the next slide is on livestock. Those are the interventions that were identified during the economic forums. And as you can see, like for example, improving animal husbandry, both for dairy, beef, and all of them. The plan is to actually double milk production. The beef plan is to actually improve on the livestock carcass, say from 80 kilogram to 170 kg. That can be done actually by feeding the cows and providing proper feeds and improving on what we need to do so that we can actually achieve the targets. Now, the next slide, very quickly, are the bottom-up plan commitments. And for those of us who interacted with the plan, it is available in the internet or in the public. All these interventions here that we have here, the commitments, is what you see in green. And for example, under manufacturing, we have pharmaceuticals, we have the leather value chain, we have the cotton, and it's actually what I showed you that those were the short-term value chains that have been budgeted for in the financial year 23-24. So we can move to the next slide very quickly. We have agriculture, like tea, for example. The focus here has been value addition in terms of blending and branding. And hoping that we'll now increase the exports of tea at least by over 50% by the end of the 5 years. Then another priority value chain that we had been told about, we have MSMEs, and we have all the interventions like ending criminalization of work by providing licenses. This is the work of the county governments, and we've seen some county governments already doing that, Nairobi being a very good example. The next slide is on housing. Which we all know the interventions that have taken place, and the commitment there was to strengthen Jua Kali, because in terms of providing materials, we would hope that, or we'd want, for example, that we have the building materials standardized and that they would be produced by the Jua Kali sector. And then the environment, we had also commitments, and remember, these were the commitments that the people on the ground said during the campaign period. All were documented, and as you can see, there are information that is available. Then the next one is a summary of the specific value chain interventions that were identified. And in terms of these interventions, we talked a lot about the border, and that, the safety issues and providing finances and all that they needed to do. And as you can see, just like what we did for crops, we've also ticked the various interventions and the investments that need to be done in each of these value chain interventions for this particular sector. So the next one is just a slide very quickly on now the economic forum detailed interventions. For example, the borders. I can just pick this one alone, then the rest will just move very quickly. The people on the ground said we needed occupational safety. They needed to be safe and to be helped. And because what they were saying is that you go to every hospital, you find there's just a ward that is actually put aside for border accidents. And that was an issue that needs to be taken care of. Insurance schemes for them. I think partially this has been done. Improved cost savings through progressive transition to electric motorbikes. I think this is work on cause. And then a border policy, because this is a big industry that actually needs to be supported. So as you can see, all the detailed interventions are there, and the state departments have this information, and this is what they are working on. Then now the next one, I'll not read. We had the industrial parks. Those were detailed interventions. We have the market stalls and open markets. Those were also detailed interventions. And it's very clear. We have the Juakali artisans. We have detailed interventions in terms of providing credit. We have the kiosks and commercial properties, where we are saying that's why we have the Hustler Fund, so that they can actually access finance. So all those were documented, providing street lights so that they can actually do their business in a comfortable environment. That was well documented. And then the next one is the street vendors and the hawkers, similar to what I said earlier on, the criminalization of the hawkers' businesses through licensing. Then trading spaces, counties should provide trading spaces in each county. So all that is there. Then we have another very important industry, artisanal mining and quarrying. This is actually an industry that has a potential actually of increasing income, expanding the revenue base for this country, and also creating jobs. And we can see all that. The Mining Act 2016, 2010 has to be adhered to so that happens. Then the rest, we can just quickly go through the rest. Then we had those on creative economy and health. 1 minute, Mercy, I'm finishing. We have all the commitments detailed. And then the next slide, health. We've seen what has been happening in the health sector. And we don't need to belabor here what has been happening. But as you can see, what's happening was actually what the people on the ground told us, and we have actually lived up to that. And I think up to that point, I will stop. My colleague can come and now tell us how far we have gone. Thank you so much.
Your Excellency, the Deputy President, Your Excellencies, the ambassadors, colleagues, PSS, cabinet secretaries, all protocol observed, good afternoon. Now, of mine, I have 5 minutes basically to highlight some of the achievements, or basically highlight the progress that has been made so far with respect to the operationalization of the plan. So better, I want to make two very profound statements at the beginning so that we are able to look at the context in which better was being implemented. Of course, the chair did mention at the beginning that the implementation of better was commenced in the context of a perfect storm. And some of the issues that we've been grappling with as a country were very profoundly highlighted by the CS Finance. So that perfect storm has made it very, very challenging for the government to implement this program that has been presented by my colleague Irene. Now, despite that challenge, despite the kind of difficult circumstances under which better was being implemented, quite a number of achievements have been recorded. When we look at how we've been implementing better, especially operationalizing it, one of the first things we did was to organize better first around what is short term, what is medium term, and what is long term. In other words, all those sectors and all those pillars that were identified as priorities have been further organized around what constitutes quick wins. And so the report I'll highlight presently is based on the quick wins, not the medium term and not the long term. Then a second point is that we also organized better around strategic objectives. And of course, those were highlighted by the chair. Addressing the cost of living was a very fundamental and immediate objective that needed to be addressed. Expanding the revenue base, the CS Treasury competently talked about that, so we will not provide any highlights on that. Then job creation was a major thing. As we went around the country, creation of jobs became employment. It's a big issue that needs to be addressed. It may not be immediate in terms of impacts, but then, of course, some of the things that are being done in terms of implementing better will go towards job creation. And then, of course, the foreign exchange stability was another objective, which, again, is in the domain of the CS Treasury. And the fifth strategic area was inclusive growth. Now, in terms of highlighting the progress made so far, if we can go to the next slide and the next one, I'll speak to three issues. Number one, addressing the cost of living. Number two, job creation. And then number three, I'll look at one of the sectors where we've made quite a bit of impact. Oh, that part is not there. Okay, I'll talk from the wherever. Now, in terms of cost of living, we all do know that quite a bit of work has been done. We do know, for instance, how inflation has not only come down because of the bamba harvest that was experienced this year, and that bamba harvest did not just happen. It happened because, in the first place, His Excellency the President made a very deliberate decision to subsidize production away from subsidies, subsidizing consumption. Because prior to taking the reins of his administration, we knew that there was a cost of living crisis in this country. So the specific measure to subsidize production through fertilizers became very fundamental. And as a result, we know that, number one, productivity, in fact, as a result of subsidizing production through fertilizers, one, we know that the yields, for instance, per acre, because we've been collecting that data, the yields per acre have increased from 8 bags per acre to 12 bags. In other words, you're looking at an almost 50% increased productivity as a result of that intervention. Number two, we know that the prices of unga has come down. A 90 kg bag of maize, for instance, is currently trading at between 3,800, 4,000 shillings, away from what it was in some time last year, September last year, which was, I think it was around 6,500. So when we are looking at the cost of living, quite a number of things have been done. Specific measures have been put into place to ensure that the cost of living is being addressed. In fact, when you look at even beyond maize, you see other interventions in the coffee sector, you see other interventions in the milk sector, the dryers that my colleague talked about to support post-harvest losses, all those things have been put in place. And finally, in terms of highlighting progress, of course, His Excellency the President did indicate during his State of Nation address that the one sector where he's very committed to make very fundamental change, one of the sectors is the health sector. A lot of work has been done there in the health sector. Unfortunately, the slides didn't come, but then we've really achieved the quick wins, but a lot of work needs to be done. And therefore, this congregation here is timely because it enables us to work together as a team to support that. Thank you very much, Mercy.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for that first presentation. Indeed, the agenda is a very detailed document, and the full report will be shared with you through the Secretariat, through the DPF. Let me take this opportunity to now invite the PS State Department for Economic Planning, James Muhati, to come and take us through the MTP4. Karibu PS.
Your Excellency, the Deputy President, the Cabinet Secretaries, the PSS, Your Excellencies, the ambassadors, all protocols observed. In the interest of time, I would want to take you through the MTP4. And as you're aware, this is a document. It is quite a huge document, about 400 to 500 pages. But out of my presentations, I want to basically ensure that you appreciate the objectives of the MTP4, the process at a very high level, and then the alignment. How then did we have, how is this a 5-year plan aligned to the agenda and the other priorities of the government? I'll talk about the implementation, and then how are we going to measure the performance or the achievement of this plan, and then the opportunities that are there in this plan for purposes of collaboration. I'll be able to share with you all these. Now, as you're aware, we have had the Kenya Vision 2030, which has been the long-term plan, and this long-term plan has been implemented through what we are calling the medium-term plan. These are five-year plans. So we had the first 5-year plan, which was in 2008 to 2012, and then it was followed by the second one of 2013 to 2017. Then we have the third plan, which was 2018 to 2022, and then now we have this fourth medium-term plan. Now, the objective of the Vision 2030, as we are all aware, was first to be able to transform Kenya as a country into a newly industrializing middle-income country, providing a high quality of life to all its citizens, and also to be able to, in a secure and safer environment. We have analyzed and done the evaluation on how far we have come with the Vision 2030 in that MTP document that will be shared with you to see how far we have come with the Vision 2030. But one of the achievements in the Vision 2030, in 2014, Kenya actually was able to achieve the middle income status. And we have achieved other infrastructure improvements and other areas of economic development through the implementation of the Vision 2030. Now, the MTP4 is very, very important because this is the last 5-year plan of this Vision 2030 that we are implementing, because after this, then we'll only have 3 years, and then we need to move to the other long-term plan, and these conversations will be able to commence very soon. We have ensured that this plan is aligned. One, you've seen how elaborate the plan is, the agenda, the manifesto of the Kenya Kwanza government. We have ensured that the MTP4 has been aligned to the manifesto. One of the things then that we were able to ensure has happened is that the agenda comes with 5 sectors, prioritizing 5 sectors. which I'll be able to show you and which we have been able to see there. In the organization of the government, as you are all aware, we have about 27 sectors. So the first instance was to ensure that we have mapped the 27 sectors of the government into the 5 beta sectors has been articulated here. Now, the other issue was then that as a country, and we are very categorical on this, that we only have one plan. So we were also to ensure that all the county integrated development plans, as has been discussed here, have been aligned to this particular plan, the MTP4 plan. And this was done through various engagements with the county governments to ensure that the priorities of this government have been, the priorities of the government have been captured within the CDIP plans. And as a state department, as a government, we have continued also to support the CIDPs through the issuance of guidelines in terms of how those CIDPs are supposed to be developed and even sustained and maintained going forward. We have conducted the sensitization of all the county executive committee members and the various leadership of the county government in regard to the alignment to beta. I would want to move on to the other point I pointed out, that the objectives of the MTP4, as you're aware, first is to facilitate the successive implementation of the Kenya Vision 2030. And then through this 5-year plan, as a government, we are able to outline our policies, our programs, and projects, the plans which the government intends to mainstream or implement during the medium-term plan. This plan also, as I've indicated, carries with it the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, and also it is the one that is going to transition the country to the next long-term development plan, as I've indicated. As on the slides there, you can be able to see the elaborate process, which involved a lot of stakeholder engagement. One of the interesting things that probably will be important for you to note is that the preparation of this plan started in the year 2021. 2021 through stakeholder engagements at the lowest levels in the country. Thereafter, you are aware we came to the 2022 general election when this plan had already started being developed. And when we had the new administration coming into office, then it was important now for us to take the manifesto and ensure that the manifesto or the agenda or the priorities of this government have been incorporated in the plan. And that's where I was talking about the alignment. So the next slide is on the key objectives, the pillars and the sectors. I will not repeat this. The Economic Advisory Council has taken us through. In terms of the macroeconomic framework that informed this plan, the CS has talked to it, despite the challenges that are there. First is to grow our GDP from the current 4.8% to about 7.2% in the year 2027. That is the key target in terms of the indicator that we are looking for in the GDP growth. And this growth is expected to be driven by those key priority areas that have been highlighted in those critical sectors. This include raising agricultural productivity. We've heard about the results in regard to the yield at the moment. To be able to provide farmers with access to farm inputs, and then also to be able to transform the microeconomic enterprises. So I'll move on to the next stage. The next part is the highlights. I want to move to the key priorities. You can move on. Yeah, these are just examples that illustrate or demonstrate the key priorities in the various sectors. For example, if you go to the finance and production sector within the plan, we have the industrial infrastructure development. If you go down there, you'll be able to see other aspects. For example, in finance, the macroeconomic research, modeling, and forecasting, and then, of course, strengthening monitoring and evaluation systems, and so on and so forth. So I'll not be able to belabor that. I'll move on to the next slide, which is financial requirements for the plan. The total costing of this particular plan would be about 16.6 trillion in terms of the estimate. And we've been able to break down in terms of what is expected from the government and what is the donor-funded projects and what is supposed to go to the PPPs. But this as planned, and as we go into the implementation, there are activities that are happening that may be able to shift such that some of these priorities are taken over by other fund partners. Now, in terms of now the implementation, we, of course, have a very elaborate monitoring and evaluation and reporting process. This plan is expected to be implemented in the various ministries and departments. And as the Ministry of National Treasury and Economic Planning, we support the function of the central planning and management monitoring units within the state departments. We have economists there who will ensure that the plan is implemented and they are able to report on the key performance indicators which we're able to report on that particular plan. Now, I want just to touch on the collaborations. We have prepared a summary of what we are calling the key performance indicator. We have a report here, what we are calling a key investment opportunities, which we'll be able to share through the collaborative frameworks. And then we'll also be able to look at the financing options which are available to be able to support the projects that we have. So I think I will want to stop there, Mercy. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together again for PS Muhati. In this session, we have come across certain things. The bottom-up economic transformation agenda aims for economic turnaround. The value chains have been identified and prioritized. The MTP4 has been costed, and we have seen the amount, and we have also seen the mechanisms that will enable achieve this, because in the beginning, His Excellency the Deputy President indicated that we want to go far, so we need to all work together. In the interest of time, I request you to hold your questions. We will have a plenary at the end of all these sessions. So without further ado, allow me to invite PS, National Treasury, Chris Kipto, to come and moderate the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CS Mercy. Let me just introduce the next session by saying the following, that Kenya places a lot of emphasis on international development cooperation, through which overseas development assistance plays a critical role in complementing and catalyzing our development. We have ensured alignment of ODA to government's national development agenda. We will continue efforts to ensure that the new mobilized resources are aligned to the bottom-up economic agenda going forward. The timelines of execution of the programs financed by ODA is critical for efficient and effective delivery of services to the citizens of Kenya. This will also reduce transaction costs to the government. Knowledge of where ODA is applied and the modalities helps the government in ensuring alignment to national priorities and reduces duplication of effort. It also improves transparency and accountability. Therefore, Your Excellency, in this session, without looking at the numbers, we will be shown where ODA is applied, our partners, and the composition in terms of loans and grants. We'll also receive a presentation on off-budget financing by our development partners. Without much ado, therefore, I now invite Dr. Jane Kirengai, Head of the International Development Partnerships Coordinating Unit in your office, to make our presentation. Welcome, Jen.
Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, this will be very brief. And the objective of this session, the UN resident coordinator will also make a presentation. We will also make a presentation. And the objective behind this session is sort of setting the agenda for the DPF going forward. So ideally, we just sort of bringing history into the room, highlighting some challenges, and in the next steps, trying to figure out how do we tackle these challenges as part of our dialogue and our agenda going forward. So not to focus too much on the numbers we're presenting, and we avoided absolute numbers. We're just presenting ratios and proportions, and the UN resident coordinator will do the same so that we sort of set the context. We are reactivating our dialogue. Where are we going to take it? Where do we start? What issues are we grappling with? So that's the spirit of this session, sort of guiding our dialogue going forward. And if the team can put up the presentation, I'll take 3 minutes and then invite the resident coordinator. 3 minutes only, not more than that. I'll save all the time that I yielded to Mercy. Let's take it forward. Tafadhali. I'll provide a very brief context on the overall ODA in an overview of grants and loans, bilateral, multilateral, absorption rates, then indicative of budget funding as given to us, and then some noted challenges just to set the context for our dialogue. Let's proceed. And this one we can skip. We've already gone through it. And in terms of the overall portfolio, this is how it looks like. And I guess even we get fresh numbers, the proportions would remain more or less the same. 86% loans and 14% grants. And going forward, how is this then? Who are our partners? We can see who our partners are. And you can see in terms of bilateral support, we have presented them there. We have Japan, we have China, Italy, France, Germany, South Korea, and others. But let's also remember that some of these partners also put their resources in the multilateral baskets. For example, other countries in the EU would also have their resources in the EDF. So this is the background within which we are presenting. What does the lay of the land look like in terms of our support, the support we receive from our partners, and how then it relates to the overall basket of support. Next, we can go then to multilateral, the multilateral partners. This is a no-brainer. I think we have had this morning from the IMF and the World Bank, and we know how important it is, especially this time when we really have a very tight fiscal framework, that we get flexible resources, particularly budget support, that then comes in to just give us some fiscal space to respond to the current fiscal stress. So that's the way it looks like. We have IMF, World Bank, we have the African Development Bank. The Global Fund is key, the EDF, the European Development Fund. We have Gavi, IFAD, and I think the others would be somewhere in that basket. Very important, and we want to see how do we take this forward and appreciating that support. In the next slide, we wanted to just check how does it look like in terms of the sectors. Where is the money going? We have just listened to the MTP4 and a bottom-up economic transformation agenda, and you can see a lot of money is going to key infrastructure sectors. We have a lot of money going to energy, and I can see CS smiling because a lot of support goes to his portfolio. We see a lot more going to infrastructure, to water, TVET. But what we observed, sadly, we've seen limited support to education and to agriculture, but these are important sectors for livelihood and for building resilience. So I think going forward, we would want to see a lot more money going to build the basic education, resilience in livelihood sectors, and I think also MSMEs would be important because these are for livelihoods. Next. This is the way the grants look like. Where are the grants going? Fortunately, a lot of grants go to the health sector, and again to infrastructure and to water. Some to devolution, And we know most of these projects are implemented at the county level. So it is important going forward, because we're talking about aligning our support to the priority sectors. How do we begin to recalibrate our priorities in line with what we have just seen? That is the spirit of this slide. Forget the absolute numbers, but it's asking, would we really want to continue in this trajectory, or do we need to tweak a little bit in line with our priorities? The next, we wanted to flash a little bit how absorption rates look like. And in the slide there, you will see that the absorption levels for loans is about 25%, and even much lower for grants, which is a bit of a contradiction, given that there really less costs associated with grants, and we'd want to see, going forward, how do we increase our absorption rates, not just for loans, but more so for grants. Going to be super important. Next, we wanted to just flash some numbers of some projects that crossed still with some undisbursed amounts, and you can see for loans, we had some projects that closed in the past with up to 67% of funds unabsorbed, and for grants up to 61%. This is the kind of conversation we want to see. How do we change this going forward? And finally, yes, we received some data on off-budget funding. And again, in light of transparency and openness and using country systems, this would be something we want to discuss going forward in the DPF. And you can actually see, without going into specific numbers, the kind of money that is off budget. And it would be good to see how well also the funding that is off budget, to which sectors is it going, and how well do we align that to our priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I'll edit there with some quick noted challenges that, again, we agree this is not a whining platform, but a platform for setting the agenda going forward. Some of the challenges are there: land acquisition, procurement, litigation, limited counterpart funding, deployment of staff, and duplication of efforts. So let me end it here so that I give this opportunity to the next speaker. Then we can take this in the next steps. Thank you so much.
So just to add, before I call on Stephen Jackson, to say that we are currently undertaking portfolio reviews of all programs and projects that we are getting support from our donors. And number two, all the things that Jen has just highlighted there, we are addressing each one of them to unlock the challenges so that we increase absorption. We are sitting on huge dollars of undisbursed amounts of loans taken but not utilized, some of which we are paying commitment fees. So we really want to address this, and we would seek your cooperation on this so that we ensure that we use the funds we already have through your support. So let me now call on the UN Resident Coordinator, Stephen Jackson, to make his contribution. Welcome, Stephen.
Mheshimiwa Naibu Rais, Waheshimiwa Mabalozi, Marafiki, Hamjambo. Since this is my first moment to take the floor, let me just thank you, Excellency Deputy President, as co-chair with the Dutch Ambassador, His Excellency Martin Brouwer, very much for convening us today. This is fantastic, and looking forward to this being a rolling process that really allows us to get traction on the issues and the opportunities that we have in this partnership with you. So my task is really to counterpoint and counterpart what Jane has just presented. And so let me see, do I have a clicker here? I do not. No? So let's go to the next slide, please. So, Excellency, you started, and several other speakers also started by reminding us of the Paris Principles for aid effectiveness around accountability, around impact, and so on. Underlying the Paris Principles is one really important principle, and that is visibility, mutual visibility. And one of the things that we want to do with this forum is to give you much better visibility of all of the efforts that the different partners are going to with Kenya and on Kenya's behalf. But, next slide, please. There is a challenge. I think many of you will be familiar with the legend of the blind men and the elephant, each of them grasping a different bit of the elephant, some of them thinking that they have hold of a spear, some of them thinking that they have hold of all kinds of other parts of the elephant, of a wall. And that's really the challenge with aid, because it's very difficult to count it. It exists in multiple pots, it's very fragmented. So what counts as aid? Is it loans, is it grants, is it both? Is it on or off budget? From what country does it come? Over what period of time? All of these things make it quite difficult to give you a consolidated picture. What we want to do with this forum is to have that be a rolling process where we give you a better and better and better picture, Excellency Deputy President. Where can we start? Well, one place to start, next slide please, is with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, which every year collects statistics on aid flows around the world. It has 38 member countries, Excellency, so that's not 193 or 192, but 38 is a very good place to begin, and you can see there in that logo many of the countries in the hall with us today are amongst those who report their work under that framework. So if we start from there, we can get some sense of the totality of aid support to Kenya, both on and off budget. As Jane said, next slide please, we won't dwell over much on the numbers, but just to give you a sense, if you look at that top line, so that represents the total aid flows recorded by the OECD for Kenya over the last 5 years. Fairly constant at around just above or a little bit below $3 billion US, in other words, 200 billion Kenya shillings per annum, with a spike in 2020 going up, and we all know why that was from COVID. Interestingly, and this is where we will have to do some work in terms of the proportions, for the OECD numbers, loans and grants are about the same, about $1.5 billion in the most recent year recorded, 2021. And then just down at the bottom line here is the percentage that ODA represents compared with gross national income. And that fluctuates from between about 3% and 4% in any given year. I can very quickly skip through these slides. These are some of the same numbers just depicted in graphic form, showing you the breakdown over those 5 years between money reported by the Development Assistance Committee countries and the World Bank Group total. That's this slide. Next slide. And we will, of course, be distributing all of these later. Sorry, I think we've skipped a couple there. Can we just go back? One more back? Yeah, there we go. Forward again. There we go. Thank you. This is trends broken down by source, and then the next one is loans versus grants. This is loans versus grants. Loans took a big spike in the run-up to COVID and then fell again in 2021, and now we're back to where is our effort going sector by sector. This slide shows the total investment, loans and grants, broken down by social, economic, production, multi-sector, and humanitarian aid. And so you can see again a spike around COVID, not a big surprise in 2020, and otherwise a leveling off. Next slide. This one, I think, is what I would like to draw your attention to. So this is the counterpart, in a way, of the slide that Jane gave, showing the sector-by-sector breakdown, and in reverse order. So number one being the biggest, to government and civil society, population and reproductive health. So government and civil society going up in 2021 to almost $500 million. population and reproductive health falling to about 400 million, health, energy, budget, agriculture, transport, emergency response, water supply, and general environmental protection. And I think that one's very interesting given the recent Africa Climate Summit, sir, that actually, as of 2021, support to the... This is just the same thing, put as simply as we can. So showing that the lion's share, 15% going to government and civil society, the next biggest population and reproductive health, and so on backwards. Now, all of that is very dead. Interesting, but dead. So if we go to the next slide, now there is a very short video here. It's about 15 seconds long, so blink and you'll miss it. But if we can play it, you should see some things happening on screen. Is that moving? Yes. Here we go.
Low of 1.3 billion to a high of 1.7. Essentially what's happened is that the downspend in reproductive health has been offset by upticks in government and civil society, water, health general, and even health, your basic health. The balance of funders has been principally the U.S., but there's been a big story with IDA coming out here. If you remove the two larger donors, we can see the trends from the smaller. France, Japan, and Germany have been among the larger bilateral donors, as well as the UK, which has come down from a high. We can also see that the overall spend here has gone down from HIV. It's been replaced by public finance management, decentralized support to subnational government, and even of late, public policy, administrative management, and health policy.
So, Excellency, the details of that were not important. They were just to illustrate the numbers that come from this OECD DAC every year are in the public domain. You can access them on the web. So Kenya has them, we all have them. What we've done, working with an organization called Sharing Strategies, is to build a prototype for a front end, a portal, a tool that you and we can use to look at and interrogate those numbers. So that was the voice of a colleague called Seth Cochran from a group called Sharing Strategies, just demoing some of the things that that portal can do. And what I'd like to suggest is that we increasingly use that portal and we build on it with the other numbers that we're going to be collecting through this process, so that you have a real-time way of looking at where the money is coming from and where it is going to. Almost finished. Let's go to the next slide. Numbers alone and money doesn't really tell you much until you know about results and impact. And that's really, of course, what the Paris Principles are about. So it's our proposal as co-chairs that we should move in subsequent meetings of this development forum to starting to try to report to you on results achieved. Now, there are how many of us in the room, and each of us are engaged in development action. So we will have to do some putting together and some grouping. But we think it would be important to give you a rolling sense of the kinds of things that the development partners feel that they've been able to help Kenya achieve together. My last slide. So this is really a discussion starter, as Jane said, Excellency Deputy President. What we need to do, starting from today and going forward into a regular rhythm of meetings of this forum, is first of all to increase transparency for all development support, but secondly, in particular, for the off-budget support, because if we don't give you that visibility, it won't come to you automatically. And it's an important part of our partnership with you that it should be visible. We also want to look specifically, and Jane, you touched on this, at how that support lines up, or doesn't, with the government's explicit priorities under BETA and MTP4. So we need to find ways of doing that mapping from the kinds of sectors that we as aid partners understand to the priorities of the government. And from there, of course, strengthen our strategic dialogue with you about the direction of the support, and of course, identifying the kinds of government priorities that perhaps haven't been receiving the support that they best need. So, in short, Excellency, that's what we have for you this morning. We will circulate those numbers to everybody. But a very important caveat, the 2022 numbers will be, I think, available from OECD in December. And so we will then be able to do an update on those as well. Asante sana.
Let's give another round of applause. Yeah. Because of time, we will only have one reaction to this presentation, and that will come from Her Excellency Anne Waiguru, the chairperson of the Council of Governors. Welcome, Anne. And just to let you know, Anne used to be in the National Treasury, so she is very much an expert on these matters. Welcome.
Your Excellency, the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya, heads of mission, Co-Chair Ambassador of the Kingdom of Netherlands, Ambassador Martin Brouwer, CS, National Treasury, and all Cabinet Secretaries present, all development partners present, ladies and gentlemen, and all protocols observed, good afternoon. Allow me not to dwell too much on the issue of the finance and the presentations. I think also I was in Treasury, yes, but maybe many of you don't know that the presenter of the plan and the MTP was my boss and teacher. He's actually the one who got me interested in economics and taught me economic policy. And I think most of the things that have been said here were very clear and aligned, both from the national and county governments. I think the only thing that we're really concerned about is on the recognition of the role that the counties will play, especially in the framework of coordination of the development partners. You have had when the MTP was being presented and the plan, it was very clear we have worked together with a team from the President's office. They have been consulting and working with the county governments. We have aligned our CIDPs to the MTPs to make sure that the key priority areas of the Kenya Kwanza government are articulated for the next 5 years in all county governments' plans. We have identified the various value chains that will inform the interventions, especially in trade and industrialization and development. And so I will not go into the details, but let me also mention at this point, Your Excellency, we apologize for coming late. We had a critical clash because of an urgency with the sea stalled for the last 3 months, and we had been given a deadline to get them up and running by His Excellency. And today was the only day you could find the governors and find the national ministry to sign the agreements that we needed, the intergovernmental agreements to release the flow of funds to ensure that the CAIPs are now started off. We are completely aligned. Every county this morning, we signed 18 counties signed for their CAIPs, the County Aggregation and Industrial Development Plans, which is in line with all the value chains. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in Your Excellency, we are pleased to be part of this forum as the Council of Governors, and we recognize the objective is to review the progress and challenges in the implementation of the various programs and offer strategic direction for better cooperation and coordination. I also would want to mention that there had been, this framework started all the way when we started the devolution in 2013, and I had the privilege and the honor then to be the Minister of Devolution. And so it's the frameworks that have been revised, and we have suggestions on how we can strengthen that framework to make it more effective and therefore to be able to support the plan and the medium-term plan for the government, both the plan for the Kenya Kwanza and the medium-term plan for the government. We all recognize that devolution is enshrined in the Constitution, and therefore we have two clear levels of government. And we envision that an efficient and effective accountable governance system would work between the two levels of government in consultation and cooperation, as we have been doing with the national government and as I have mentioned. We also understand that within the structure of government, we have the Council of Governors, Secretariat that coordinates or helps coordinate the second level of government, which is the county governments. The presenters have also outlined the devolved functions in agriculture, in health mostly, in water, in trade and SMEs, in the establishment of SACCOs, all the functions that are devolved, which form a critical part of the plan by the Kenya Kwanza government. So considering that these are matters of common interest between the counties and the national government, we have mentioned that we have aligned completely with the CIDP and the MTP. So what we would want to just suggest is to ensure that there is a clear flow of information between the county governments, being actually the implementers. We suggest the council would like to propose a two-level coordination. The national level coordination targeting the development partners supporting interventions at the national government level. And the Council of Governors coordination level coordinating development partners supporting interventions at the county level. This nuanced approach allows for a comprehensive development partners engagement framework that addresses the unique structure that is the Kenyan devolution structure. We would also want the strengthened coordination of all development partner support, both at the national and county levels, is critical. We recognize that. And our strategic focus, therefore, should be to strengthen the system and fill in gaps where necessary, especially in reducing legal, policy, and administrative barriers within the government to ensure resources address the intended purposes promptly. We are also currently staring at grants. Maybe I should mention the challenges that we're facing, allocated to county programs expiring before they are utilized. An example is the Climate Smart and the NARIC funds as a result of the new amendments to the PFM Act, Section 191A to E, requiring counties to enter into intergovernmental agreements with the National Treasury for the transfer of additional allocation. As a council, we desire to have the bottlenecks removed. We have made this request and an exemption for counties for this financial year. Nothing has been forthcoming of late, but I thought it was something that we would be able to, we wanted to suggest that a consideration of the repeal of this existing provision to be considered. Finally, and as we aspire to achieve seamless coordination with development partners, we encourage development partners to actively engage the Council in co-creating new programs, especially in the social sector, bottom-up, and designing effective and impactful implementation models that can be successful in implementation of the various interventions. The Council emphasizes that there is a need to adhere to agreed fund flows, mechanisms, and clearly define the roles of all the implementing institutions to mitigate implementation drawbacks. So, to be more specific, on the Development Effective Group, where we have the co-chair of the national, it's co-chaired by the National Treasury and Development Partners Group, heads of cooperation, co-chairs, we are requesting that you consider that the Council of Governors